My name is Mike Malachi with Pink Harbor CPA. Many of the people who follow me here on LinkedIn are bankruptcy attorneys. Now, I know that you're all good bankruptcy attorneys. And I know when a client comes to you and wants to file for bankruptcy, one of the first questions you ask them is, do you owe back taxes? And you're asking that to determine, when should I file the bankruptcy? And in the bankruptcy, which should I include is there any taxes I can include that I can discharge in bankruptcy? So regarding the date available for discharge in bankruptcy, the general rule of thumb is 3 years from the time that the tax return was either filed by the client or the IRS filed a substitute for return. The general rule for a collection statutory expiration date, or CSED, is 10 years from the time that the client filed the tax return, or 10 years from the time that the IRS filed a substitute for return. Now, some bankruptcy attorneys, and not you, because I know you're really good, right? But some bankruptcy attorneys go standard 3-year, 10-year rule, and that's it. And that's what they do. And they do certain reports that will tell them if there's a tolling event involved and when things can be filed. Now, what's important is to have good analytical reports. When a client comes to you and they say, I owe back taxes, it's important to have extensive reports to determine the actual date that you can really file and include these in either bankruptcy, or you can file and have these included in you want to delay your filing to make sure that, hey, maybe 2 more months, these taxes from this year are going to drop off. So why don't we delay the filing for 2 months if we can and have them drop off from the CSED date? What's important to know is sometimes when you try to include these, the IRS will challenge what you're doing, and the IRS will say, well, hold on a second here. Normally it was 3 years to have this discharged in bankruptcy, but there's a tolling event that took place that's actually going to give us more time to extend the date for us to collect the debt. Therefore, Mr. Bankruptcy or Mrs. Bankruptcy Attorney or Ms. Bankruptcy Attorney, you cannot include this in the bankruptcy. We're challenging that. So a tolling event is a date that extends the IRS's ability to go and collect the tax. Let's talk about common tolling events. One, the client enters into an installment agreement. And when the client enters into the installment agreement, the IRS says they enter an installment agreement. It took us 120 days to make our decision on whether we were going to give them the installment agreement or not. Therefore, that added 120 days on the collection statute. Another one is we believe the client was out of the country, and therefore we added a tolling event because the IRS was out of the country for more than 6 months. So we added a tolling event on there because we could not collect the debt. Another one would be, was there a previous bankruptcy filed? And in that previous bankruptcy that was filed, that delayed us from collecting during the period they were in bankruptcy and 6 months later. And another one, believe it or not, is when the IRS files the substitute for return, and then the client challenges that substitute for return with their own filing, the IRS will try to argue incorrectly that the date that the client provided the new tax return was a superseded date to the substitute for return date. So let's talk about these things individually and how almost always IRS tolling event dates that they calculate are completely incorrect. So first, installment agreements. A general rule of thumb is within 30 days that an installment agreement is submitted, that installment agreement should be processed and done. I've seen installment agreements extend tolling events for years. Simple reason, the IRS computer systems that probably run on an Apple IIe never remove the tolling event. Client's been paying on this for 2 years now, and the IRS says, hey, we have a tolling event that lasts 24 months. We challenge that tolling event, we get that reduced down to 30 days. Now you take a client that wasn't eligible for dischargeability in bankruptcy, and now they are, or the Collection Statutory Expiration Date has hit. Clients out of the country. How do you know the client was out of the country? Were they out? Did they notify the IRS they were out of the country? Or does the IRS just believe they were out of the country? If there's no proof that they were out of the country for a period of 6 months or more, that tolling event gets completely removed. In a bankruptcy, traditionally, the IRS says, we're going to take our 6 months from the date that we were notified. That's incorrect. It's the wrong way to do it. Because what is notified, especially during COVID right now? The IRS gets notification from the bankruptcy court that it's done. That notification doesn't get processed for 8 months later. The IRS now says they were in bankruptcy up until the date that we actually inputted this in the computer system, and then 6 months on top of that. So they're adding on 8 months because of the bankruptcy. And the last one, the substitute for return. The client doesn't file a tax return. IRS comes and says, hey, we are going to file a return on your behalf. The client now challenges that substitute for return. The client says, here's an actual copy, Mr. IRS, here's my actual return. I want you to reduce down the liability that's owed. What's important is that's not the client filing a tax return. The IRS has already filed the tax return for the client. That is when the date available for dischargeability of bankruptcy, or the CSED date, begins. What the client is actually doing, the taxpayer is challenging the dollar amount on that substitute for return. The original date is always the substitute for return date. It is not the day that the IRS challenged it, regardless if the client gave them a complete copy of the tax return with signatures. The reason why the client is giving the IRS that complete copy is to say, here is my proof and evidence had you corrected it correctly. Go back and change your numbers. But that substitute for return date is the date that you should start calculating for date available for dischargeability, for bankruptcy, or the CSED date. Now, what happens for many bankruptcy attorneys, when there is an IRS issue, the bankruptcy attorney will say, I want you to give Mike a call. And I want Mike to run for me a bankruptcy analyzer on your case. The client gives us a call. What we do is we have them sign off on the appropriate documentation for us to get the transcripts of the returns. We get the transcripts of the returns. I have highly sophisticated licensed software that we use here internally, and we analyze every single thing about that return and about everything that they owe. We analyze what the bankruptcy date should really be. Forget what the IRS says. This is the IRS date. This is the date we believe that it really should be. What the CSED date really should be. Forget what the IRS says. The date that we believe that it should be, because we recalculate all these tolling events. We look at wage and income transcripts, where there's substitute for returns that were filed that we believe there's going to be a lot less money owed based upon wage and income transcripts that were filed with the IRS too as well, and things that could be challenged. So we do all this work. We give the reporting package back to the client, and we also send to the attorney, with the approval of the client, the bankruptcy analyzer package. It gives you every single thing that you could need. This is not going on a free website and punching in a few numbers and getting what they say. This is actually going through all of the transcripts, all the wage and income transcripts, all the transactional history with the IRS, and looking at every single thing to determine what are the correct dates to be using. This is a service you should be providing to your client. If you're not doing it now, if you're just using a simple Excel spreadsheet, or you're looking at certain dates, you're not doing the right kind of service to your client. Now, some of you out there might be using software of your own, and if you are, that's fantastic. Some of you might be very familiar with calculating CSED dates and the dates availability for bankruptcy and challenging things, and if you are, that's fantastic. But for most bankruptcy attorneys, this isn't in your wheelhouse. This is not something you do every day. You do an excellent job at filing the bankruptcy correctly, challenging creditors, representing your debtor, doing everything you have to do. You do an excellent job at that. But when it comes to the actual tax component of it, for many bankruptcy attorneys, this is something that's outside your wheelhouse. Now, we have a fee that we charge on to the client. And many bankruptcy attorneys will either want us to charge that to the client directly, or they'll want to make it an upcharge where we charge our fee, the bankruptcy attorney pays us, and they upcharge it to the client. Whichever way you want to do is fine with us. Our goal is to provide an excellent service to your client. I'm Mike with Pink Harbor CPA. I'd love to talk to you about this in more detail. My personal telephone number is 856-226-9524. And my personal email address is mike@pinkharbor.com. I would love to talk to you, answer any questions you might have. You have a great day.